Have you ever stopped to think that maybe life doesn't have a fixed set of rules? What if everything you've been taught about right and wrong was nothing more than a game invented by other people? A game you started playing without even realizing it. Friedrich Nietzsche looked at the world and declared, "When the old certainties collapse, the life manual disappears." So, what's left? A vast, empty game board where each person has to create their own moves. But that's not easy. It's both an invitation to freedom and a huge responsibility. In this video, we're going to explore how Nietzsche challenged herd morality, rejected absolute truths, and turned existence into something you don't just follow, but create. Get ready to discover how you can stop being just a piece on the board and start being the player in the game of your own life. Herd morality is one of the most famous and hard-hitting targets in Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophy. Looking at it isn't just revisiting a 19th century critique. It's facing a force that, almost invisibly, still shapes our choices, fears, and ambitions in the 21st century. Nietzsche saw the dominant morality of his time as the result of a long process of taming human beings, where each person's bold, creative, and unique instincts were gradually replaced by inherited values that demand conformity and obedience. But what exactly is this herd morality? In On the Genealogy of Morality, Nietzsche explains how, throughout history, human communities began to value safety, equality, and predictability over creativity, individuality, and excellence. It's a morality that prizes being like everyone else, because in a herd, anyone who strays too far from the group is at risk. This inherited mindset says, don't stand out too much, don't question what everyone already accepts. Follow the rules, it's safer that way. The problem, Nietzsche argues, is that this safety comes at a steep price. It smothers our ability to create new values, and with that, it weakens life itself. He points out something crucial. Much of what we call good or bad doesn't come from our own reflection, but from habits handed down and solidified into moral norms. Here's the core challenge. Are our deepest convictions truly ours, or are they just echoes of the herd? When we repeat, it's wrong to do X, or it's right to do Y, are we basing that on principles we've personally examined? Or are we just recycling beliefs passed from generation to generation? Nietzsche wants us to see how herd morality works as a leveling force. It tells us humility is always a virtue, but ignores that excessive humility can just be fear of showing who we really are. It glorifies obedience as the highest form of goodness, but rarely admits that blind obedience can mean complicity in injustice. And perhaps most dangerously, it turns resentment into a virtue. Those who can't, or won't, seek their own greatness start to despise the greatness of others, rebranding that bitterness as justice or equality. So herd morality isn't just a set of rules, it's a mindset. It teaches us to see life as something that should be safe, predictable, and equal, even if that means cutting away the diversity of talents, passions, and perspectives that could flourish if everyone stayed true to their own nature. And this is where Nietzsche radically breaks from moral views inherited from both the Christian tradition and modern rationalist philosophy. For him, life is a field of creation, not just the maintenance of preset rules. This isn't, as some mistakenly think, an attack on empathy or cooperation. Nietzsche isn't defending crude selfishness or the cartoon version of survival of the fittest. What he's questioning is forced uniformity, the kind that erases differences under the excuse of protecting the group. He admits every society needs some order, but warns that when order becomes an end in itself, it turns into a prison. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche uses powerful images to make this point. He talks about the last man, someone with no high ambitions, who lives only for comfort and safety, avoiding any risk or effort that could cause discomfort. The last man is proud of not hurting anyone, but his goodness is passive, the goodness of someone who doesn't dare to create, fight, or transcend. It's goodness born from exhaustion and fear, not fullness of life. When Nietzsche calls us to rise above herd morality, he's not saying we should live without ethics. Quite the opposite. He's challenging us to create our own values, based on what truly strengthens and enriches our existence. That takes courage, because it means exposing yourself to judgment and often hostility from those who want things to stay the same. It's far easier to follow inherited rules than to invent your own. But it's in that act of invention that creative freedom comes alive. And here's where it gets practical for today. How many of our decisions are made automatically, based on what everybody considers acceptable? This can be as big as choosing a career because it's safe, or as subtle as holding back your opinion for fear of being seen as too different. Herd morality doesn't show up as an obvious dictator. It slips inside us as a quiet voice saying, "Don't step out of line." Overcoming that voice doesn't mean ignoring the community altogether. It's about balancing outside input with inner loyalty. It's asking yourself constantly, does this rule I follow really serve my life, or does it just keep me from growing? It's a continuous act of self-examination, like doing archaeology on your own mind to separate what's truly yours from what's just inherited. This mindset takes work. It demands that we cultivate what Nietzsche called the will to power, not dominance over others, but the creative drive to affirm and expand your own life. That will can't grow if we're content to follow a manual written by someone else. It flourishes when we dare to write our own, even if that means making mistakes, starting over, and facing resistance from those who prefer stability over change. Nietzsche knew this path isn't for everyone. Many prefer the comfort of the herd, and no one can be forced to want creative freedom. But for those who feel that living, like everyone else, is dying a little inside each day, the critique of herd morality is a call to action. A call to break through the invisible fences around us and step into the unknown. Because in the end, true security doesn't come from never taking risks, but from knowing you've lived in line with who you really are. As he wrote in Beyond Good and Evil, the individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. If you try it, you'll often be lonely and sometimes frightened. But no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. That's the heart of Nietzsche's critique, claiming ownership of yourself, even if it means leaving behind inherited certainties. And maybe the most freeing and most challenging part is this. There's no universal manual telling us which values to create. Herd morality offers that sense of safety, but it's an illusion. Creating your own values means stepping into uncharted territory, where the only compass is your own conscience. It's a risk, yes, but it's the risk of a life that's truly your own. Transvaluation of values is the decisive step in Nietzsche's philosophy. After criticizing herd morality, he proposes rebuilding morality based on life itself, not on absolute rules. It's an invitation to abandon fixed ideas of good and evil, and to create values that actually strengthen our existence and expand our creative power. In On the Genealogy of Morality and the Antichrist, Nietzsche shows that the values we inherit are neither universal nor eternal. They were born out of specific historical circumstances, political interests, and religious needs. Christian morality, for example, exalts humility, obedience, and self-denial as supreme virtues. For Nietzsche, this was a reaction of the weak against the vitality and pride of the strong, something that made sense in its original context, but eventually became a general rule that stifled creativity and the affirmation of life. Transvaluation begins when we realize that good and evil are not metaphysical truths, but human inventions. Breaking that illusion is the first step. The second is to create new values, rooted in lived experience. Nietzsche's standard is both simple and demanding. Something is good if it strengthens and expands life. It is bad if it weakens life, makes it reactive, or limits it. The goal isn't to seek divine approval or social consensus, but to ask yourself, does this bring me closer to a full life? Does it awaken my creative power? This process doesn't offer the security of inherited morality. On the contrary, It requires abandoning ready-made manuals and taking responsibility for making decisions ourselves. It's easier to follow external commandments, but transvaluation forces us to find our own why, which, as Nietzsche says in Beyond Good and Evil, allows us to endure almost anyhow. This idea is tied to the ideal of the Übermensch, the overman or beyond man, someone who doesn't simply obey inherited values, but creates their own, adapted to their vision and potential. The Übermensch doesn't just live, they create life, shaping the chaos around them like an artist shapes marble. Transvaluation isn't about living impulsively or chasing whims. Creating values means setting deep and lasting directions, even if they can be revised later. It's an art that requires observation and experimentation. If a value weakens us or makes us passive, it should be abandoned. If it pushes us to act, create, and take risks, it's fertile. Life is the laboratory, and transvaluation is the method. In today's world, this could mean leaving a career that has no personal meaning, even if it brings status, creating art without bowing to market trends, or forming independent opinions despite political and media pressure. In all cases, what matters is that the values you choose come from lived experience, not from other people's expectations. Nietzsche knew this path meets resistance. Inherited values survive because they create comfort zones and support power structures. By suggesting that each person recreate their own values, he challenges those structures. That's why transvaluation demands courage and often the willingness to face solitude. Not total isolation, but the absence of constant approval from the herd. That solitude, however, is fertile. As Nietzsche writes in The Gay Science, we must have chaos within us to give birth to a dancing star. That chaos is the creative freedom that appears when we abandon pre-written scripts and start living as the authors of our own rules. Transvaluation isn't the enemy of morality, but of rigid moralism. It doesn't destroy values just to leave a void, as nihilism does, but to create something new, stronger, and more alive. It's an ongoing process. There's no final point where you can say, I've arrived. Just as an artist never stops searching for new forms, the creator of values is always adjusting and reinventing. Ultimately, Nietzsche invites us to live in such a way that if we had to repeat every act infinitely, as in his idea of the eternal return, we would still choose to live the same way. Creating values that are worth that eternal return is the most radical way to affirm life. In this sense, transvaluation of values isn't just a philosophical concept, it's a way of living. It's leaving behind the comfort of fixed rules to embrace the adventure of creating your own meaning, and, in doing so, turning your life into a work of art. The will to power is one of the most central and most misunderstood ideas in Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophy. It's often mistakenly reduced to dominating others or the law of the strongest, but in reality, it's far deeper and broader. For Nietzsche, the will to power is the fundamental force driving all life, not just a simple instinct to survive, but an impulse to expand, create, and affirm oneself. Unlike earlier philosophers like Schopenhauer, who saw life's essence as a will to live, a drive to avoid suffering and preserve oneself, Nietzsche saw that humans and all living beings go beyond mere self-preservation. What moves us is not just continuing to exist, but expanding our existence, exploring new horizons, and creating what didn't exist before. Life wants more life, and that more is what he calls the will to power. This concept appears in works like Beyond Good and Evil, The Gay Science, and the posthumous fragments compiled in The Will to Power. In it, life is seen as a dynamic field of forces in constant struggle and transformation. Everything, from the forces of nature to human creations, expresses this fundamental impulse. The plant breaking through asphalt to reach the sun, the artist inventing a new form of beauty, the thinker challenging long-held ideas. They're all different expressions of the will to power. The key point is that, for Nietzsche, the will to power isn't about ruling over others. Its main focus is overcoming oneself. It's the ability to turn limitations into strength, to create one's own meaning instead of blindly submitting to inherited or external rules. It's an inside-out movement, starting with the individual, but capable of influencing the world around them. This understanding breaks away from traditional morality, which tends to measure virtue by obedience to fixed laws. For Nietzsche, living only to follow commandments, whether religious, political, or cultural, is wasting life's creative potential. It's living as a performer, not as the composer of your own life. The will to power calls us to write our own score. This creative drive doesn't mean living without limits or discipline. On the contrary, creating something of value requires energy, focus, and persistence. But these limits are chosen and shaped by us, not imposed from the outside as unquestionable dogmas. A sculptor accepts the stone's resistance not as an obstacle, but as material to be transformed. An athlete accepts rigorous training not because of arbitrary rules, but because it expands their capabilities. Nietzsche also connects the will to power with health and vitality. A person with a strong will to power isn't the one who hoards material or political power at any cost, but the one whose energy overflows into creation, action, and affirmation. It's someone who can dance in the face of chaos, like Zarathustra, because they understand that life is movement, not stagnation. Psychologically, the will to power helps us see two very different postures: active and reactive. In the active posture, we act from our own inner strength, creating values and paths. In the reactive posture, we act only in response to something external, often to defend ourselves, avoid punishment, or gain approval. Herd morality, which Nietzsche criticized, encourages the reactive posture, living according to what you should or shouldn't do based on fixed standards. The will to power, in contrast, encourages the active posture, living for what we want to create and for what affirms our uniqueness. But affirming your own existence creatively is risky. It means taking responsibility for your destiny, which includes the weight of failures and consequences. Many people prefer the safety of following already traced paths, even if it means giving up their potential, because it reduces the anxiety of choice. The will to power, however, doesn't feed on safety, it feeds on challenge. Nietzsche saw the artist and the philosopher as the clearest examples of this impulse. The artist, in creating, doesn't just follow a manual, they invent new forms, challenge conventions, and venture into the unknown. The creative philosopher doesn't repeat dogmas, they question foundations and propose new ways of thinking. Both express life in expansion, not life in maintenance. This concept also reshapes how we see our relationships. The will to power doesn't have to be oppressive or destructive. At its highest form, it's the ability to inspire and create conditions for others to expand their own power. It's like a flame lighting other flames, instead of extinguishing them to shine alone. When degraded, however, it becomes the will to dominate, a poorer, reduced version of the original creative movement. Applied to today, the will to power can be seen in the courage to follow a career path that truly expresses who you are, even if it doesn't bring instant status, in creating projects and ideas that don't follow market logic, but inspiration, in developing skills that increase your independence rather than just boosting employability, according to herd standards. It's the impulse that makes us ask before any decision, will this expand or shrink my life? Nietzsche knew this vision of life isn't for everyone. It demands the willingness to handle instability, criticism, and uncertainty. But for those who accept the challenge, it offers something rare, the feeling of being alive in its most intense form. As he writes in The Gay Science, what is great in man is that he is a bridge and not a goal. The will to power is that bridge, a constant movement of overcoming, never a final destination. Perhaps the best image for understanding it is dance. Dance demands energy, attention, commitment, and, at the same time, improvisation. It's not just following preset steps, it's creating movements in the moment, reacting and inventing. Life driven by the will to power is like that. a dance with the unexpected, where difficulties aren't insurmountable walls, but different rhythms that challenge us to find new steps. In the end, the will to power invites us to replace the question, "What should I do?" with, "What can I create?" By doing this, we stop living as pieces in a game invented by others and start living as inventors of our own game. It's the radical affirmation that our life isn't just meant to be protected or preserved. It's meant to be expanded, intensified, and celebrated. As Nietzsche reminds us, become who you are. And that's not a fixed destiny waiting to be found, but a work to be built with the raw material of our energy, courage, and imagination. For Nietzsche, resentment is one of the most corrosive forces in human life. It's not just a passing feeling, but a prolonged state of hostility, often silent, toward whatever or whoever we see as the cause of our frustrations. More than eating away at us inside, resentment distorts how we create values, deeply influencing our morality. That's why Nietzsche places it at the center of his critique in On the Genealogy of Morals. He sees resentment as the foundation of what he calls slave morality, a value system born not from creative strength, but as a reaction against the strength of others. To understand this critique, we need to distinguish resentment from indignation. Indignation can be a momentary impulse in the face of a real injustice, something that might even move us to act. Resentment, however, is chronic. It doesn't seek to change reality, but to keep replaying the offense in our minds, feeding off the role of the victim. It prefers to keep the wound open, drawing from it an illusion of moral superiority. I'm better than them, even if I have no power. This is the poison Nietzsche wants to fight. In his analysis, resentment especially takes root in situations of prolonged powerlessness. When a person can't express their will to power, whether because of external repression or inner fear, they turn that energy into reactivity. Since they can't directly act on what bothers them, they mentally remake the world to bring down whatever they can't reach. In this way, the strength, success, beauty, or freedom of others comes to be seen as evil or immoral, while their own limitations are reinterpreted as virtues. This is where Nietzsche says slave morality was born, a reversal of values designed to symbolically take revenge on what can't be defeated in reality. A simple example: if someone can't reach a certain level of wealth or power, instead of trying to achieve it or redefining their goals, they may start condemning the very idea of wealth or power, calling them corrupt by nature. Resentment creates a morality in which the qualities we lack are turned into flaws, and the limitations we carry become proof of virtue. It's like painting your chains gold to better bear their weight. Nietzsche sees this posture as an existential danger because it keeps us from living actively. The resentful person doesn't create, they only react. They live facing the past, the original wound, while life demands forward movement. It's as if the whole game of life is reduced to proving, the world is unfair to me. But in that game, the resentful never wins. Even if they get recognition or revenge, they remain trapped in the victim role, because their center of gravity is always outside themselves. Nietzsche's critique, then, is not just moral, but vital. Resentment is a waste of energy. The energy that could be invested in creating, learning, and transforming oneself is redirected into fueling fantasies of revenge or endless stories of injustice. This doesn't mean injustices don't exist. Nietzsche doesn't deny them. But living permanently from them is to lock yourself into a state of weakness. The opposite of resentment for Nietzsche is the active stance. It's taking responsibility for your own destiny, even while recognizing that not everything is under your control. It's responding to difficulties by creating new possibilities, instead of searching for eternal scapegoats. This active posture isn't about naivety or passive acceptance of circumstances. It's about turning what happens to us into raw material for growth. Nietzsche sums up this attitude in the famous line, "What does not kill me makes me stronger." Twilight of the Idols. This phrase, often repeated, is not a denial of pain, but a reminder that pain can be turned into strength if it's actively worked through. Resentment, on the other hand, keeps us in the pain without ever transforming it. On a practical level, this critique is deeply relevant. How many times do we find ourselves blaming our family, society, the economy, our boss, the government, or even fate for our stagnation? Of course, all these factors can affect our lives, but when we live entirely within the logic of external blame, we also give away our capacity to act. It's like saying, "I don't do anything because they won't let me." And in doing so, we reinforce the role of powerlessness that resentment thrives on. Nietzsche invites us to change this logic, to recognize what we can't change, act on what we can, and above all, refuse to turn powerlessness into virtue. That's how we leave the vicious circle of resentment and enter the creative game of life. In that game, there are wins and losses, but both are part of movement. In the resentful stance, there is only repetition and paralysis. He also notes that entire societies and cultures can live under the sign of resentment, building value systems that protect mediocrity and punish excellence. In such environments, anyone who stands out is viewed with suspicion, and criticism of success becomes almost automatic. Escaping such a setting takes not only individual strength, but also clarity to see when collective morality has been poisoned by this reactive logic. Overcoming resentment, then, is not only a personal exercise, but also an act of cultural resistance. It's refusing to live by the victim narrative while also rejecting the collective story that demonizes greatness. It's choosing instead the creator's narrative, the one who turns obstacles into stepping stones, who measures life not by the number of blows received, but by the intensity of the creations achieved. By rejecting resentment, Nietzsche calls us to a kind of freedom that is difficult but real, the freedom not to let our wounds dictate our values. This freedom doesn't deny pain, but integrates it as fuel for something greater. And at its core, it's inseparable from the will to power. Both demand that we stop living as prisoners of the past and become architects of the future. In the game of life, resentment is like standing still, complaining about the rules while the board keeps turning. The active stance is picking up the pieces you have and playing, not to imitate others, but to make your own moves, capable of changing the course of the game. The eternal return is one of Nietzsche's most provocative and mysterious ideas. Presented strikingly in The Gay Science and Thus Spoke Zarathustra, it shouldn't be read merely as a cosmological theory about the literal repetition of the universe, but as a philosophical and existential thought experiment. At its core, it's a simple yet devastating question. If you had to live this exact same life, every single moment, good and bad, over and over for all eternity, would you accept it? Nietzsche frames this idea as a test of existential authenticity. Imagine that, at some random moment, a demon approached you and said, "Everything you've lived, every joy, every pain, every gesture, every mistake, will happen again exactly the same way, forever. Not a single detail could be changed." How you react to that news, Nietzsche suggests, reveals how deeply you affirm your own life. If the thought terrifies you, maybe you're living in a way you never truly chose. But if the thought excites you, it's a sign you're creating a life worth living and reliving. The eternal return isn't about perfection, it's about intensity. It's not about removing difficulties or avoiding pain, because they're part of life's fabric. It's about living so fully that even moments of suffering are embraced as necessary pieces of the great work that is your existence. It's looking back and saying, yes, with everything that happened, I'd do it all again. This idea challenges our tendency to postpone living. How often do we wait for the right moment to act, to love, to create, to change? The eternal return reminds us that every moment matters. There is no rehearsal. What you're doing right now is already part of the infinite repetition. If every action will echo forever, then every choice carries immense weight, and at the same time, unmatched beauty. Nietzsche ties this concept to the Dionysian spirit. the ability to say yes to life in all its dimensions, even the chaotic ones. The Dionysian spirit doesn't try to control life's flow, but dances with it, accepting impermanence and unpredictability as inseparable from joy. In this sense, the eternal return is the ultimate form of that acceptance, not just tolerating, but celebrating the endless repetition of who we are and what we live. Living by the eternal return becomes both an ethical and creative standard. It forces us to ask, am I living in a way that I would willingly live forever? If the answer is no, it's a call to change. This doesn't mean we can alter every external circumstance, but we can shift our inner stance and the choices within our control. In practical terms, applying the eternal return might mean seeking experiences that truly express who we are instead of just following expected patterns. It might mean being more present, because every conversation, every act of kindness, every creative work becomes both unique and eternal. It might also mean rethinking our priorities. If time is infinite, but our individual life is finite, what is truly worth filling our days? Nietzsche knew this idea could feel crushing. The thought of reliving every mistake, every loss, every regret forever might seem unbearable. But that's the challenge, to shape life in such a way that even its complete repetition could be embraced. It's an invitation to create an existence so aligned with who we are that, even with its inevitable hardships, we would still choose it again. It also places us before a radical responsibility. There's no second chance in the sense of starting over from zero. There's only the repetition of what we've chosen and what we've left unchanged. The eternal return removes the comfort of believing a mistake will be erased by time. It will return, along with everything else. This thought isn't meant to paralyze us, but to wake us up. If we're going to live this moment forever, let it be lived consciously and fully. Symbolically, the eternal return connects to the metaphor of life as a game. A game worth replaying isn't the one you win easily and without excitement, but the one that, even knowing its difficulties, you're eager to play again. It's a game where you learn, grow, and where each match has value in itself. Living with the eternal return in mind means designing your life like that kind of game, full of challenges, but so engaging that you'd start over as many times as needed. Nietzsche doesn't present the eternal return as a religious or scientific belief to accept, but as a mental experience that forces us to measure the quality of our lives. It's a lens that sharpens the meaning of each moment. As he writes in The Gay Science, how should we live so as not to regret anything and to want nothing to be different, neither in the past nor in the future? That's Nietzsche's measure of fullness. Ultimately, the eternal return is a dare to live more courageously. It's a rejection of the idea that life is just a hallway to somewhere else, whether a future paradise or a better phase that never comes, and a recognition that this very moment is the stage of eternity. If we're going to repeat it forever, then let it be a moment worth repeating. To live by the eternal return is to turn every act into something worthy of beginning again. It's to cultivate a life so authentic and intense that even in its shadows, we could say, yes, I want it again. And perhaps that is the most radical way to love life, not just to endure it, but to choose it without reservation, forever. The idea of having no fixed rules is a natural extension of Nietzsche's philosophy. After questioning herd morality, proposing the revaluation of values, and presenting life as a game worth restarting, he confronts us with a liberating and at the same time unsettling realization. There are no universal values that apply to everyone in all times and places. This means there's no ultimate manual for living. Each of us has to create our own rules of the game. In traditional morality, there's always a set of norms considered absolute: religious commandments, universal moral principles, natural laws, rational ideals. These rules provide a sense of safety because they remove the need to think through every decision. By following them, we feel we're on the right path and have the approval of some higher authority, whether that's God, reason, or tradition. Nietzsche, however, shakes this certainty. For him, these supposed eternal laws are nothing more than human creations that, over time, have solidified and lost their connection to real, lived life. By removing the foundation of fixed rules, Nietzsche hands us something many fear: radical freedom. If there's no universal code that defines what is good or bad, it's up to us to invent our own criteria, and not to invent them arbitrarily, but to create values that genuinely strengthen and expand our existence. Here, the game metaphor becomes even stronger. Life doesn't come with an official rulebook. We are both the players and the designers. This absence of fixed rules doesn't mean anything goes, or that every action is equally valid. It means we can't outsource responsibility for our choices to a holy book, a moral authority, or the opinion of the majority. Each person has to experiment, test, make mistakes, and adjust, like someone developing a brand new game without knowing all the mechanics that will work. It's an ongoing process of creation. The problem is that this kind of freedom can be intimidating. Without universal rules, there are no guarantees. We can't say, "I did this because it was the right thing according to some eternal law." We have to take responsibility for our decisions, even when they turn out to be wrong. Nietzsche knew this requires courage and maturity. The absence of fixed rules is an invitation to autonomy, but also a demand for personal responsibility at the highest level. This stance is the opposite of herd morality, which values the safety of conformity. In the herd, the rules are already set, and the merit lies in following them. In Nietzsche's view, following inherited rules without questioning them is giving up life's creative power. The risk of making mistakes while creating your own rules is smaller than the risk of never living authentically out of fear of stepping out of line. Living without fixed rules also means accepting that life is changeable. What works as a guiding principle in one moment may not work in another. The rules we create today may need to be revised tomorrow because our needs, desires, and circumstances change. This flexibility clashes with any absolute morality, but it's essential for a creative life. Just like in a dynamic game, the mechanics can evolve as we discover new possibilities or face new challenges. In practical terms, this might mean constantly redefining what success means to us. Instead of accepting that success is about accumulating wealth or gaining status, we might decide it's about cultivating authentic relationships, developing our talents, exploring the world, or contributing to causes we believe in. It could also mean reinventing our routines and habits so they continue to align with who we are, not with what others expect of us. Nietzsche knew this path has a price. Without fixed rules, there's no ready-made script for dealing with suffering, failure, or uncertainty. We have to create our responses in the heat of the moment. That's why he valued the figure of the free spirit, someone who doesn't cling to eternal truths, but moves with agility in the face of change. The free spirit doesn't see chaos as an enemy, but as raw material for creation. At the same time, the absence of fixed rules doesn't mean rejecting all structure. We can set rules for ourselves. The difference is that they are conscious choices, not inherited impositions. We can adopt principles like honesty, courage, or generosity, not because everyone says they're right, but because we've tested them and found they strengthen our life and the lives around us. The key difference is that we are the authors of these rules, not just their followers. In the game metaphor, living without fixed rules is like playing on a board that's constantly being redesigned. There's room for improvisation, for inventing new moves, for changing the logic when it no longer serves us. It's a harder game because there's no manual, but it's also more engaging. Every round is unique and unrepeatable. The danger of this way of living is nihilism, the feeling that without universal rules, nothing has value. Nietzsche counters this by reminding us that the absence of absolute values doesn't mean the absence of values. It means values must be created by us, not handed to us. Life's meaning isn't given, it's made by the one who lives it. That's the highest and most demanding task we can take on. So, The absence of fixed rules is both a burden and a privilege. It's the burden of having no guarantees, of having to invent new answers to old problems. But it's also the privilege of shaping life according to who we truly are, instead of squeezing ourselves into someone else's mold. It's living as an inventor, not as the executor of an inherited script. For Nietzsche, being a free spirit is one of the highest expressions of a creative life. It's not about living without responsibility or acting on a whim, but about gaining the rare ability to exist without being tied down by dogmas, those rigid, inherited, or imposed certainties that tell us how we should think, feel, and act. A free spirit is someone who allows themselves to explore open possibilities, question what seems obvious, and choose their own path, even if it means stepping away from the dominant mindset. The concept appears in works like Human, All Too Human, and Beyond Good and Evil. Nietzsche describes the free spirit as someone who has broken away from absolute truths, who has learned to live without relying on an external moral authority to guide every step. This is someone who isn't afraid of the emptiness left by the fall of old certainties, because they see in that emptiness fertile ground for creation. The road to becoming a free spirit is demanding. First, because it requires the courage to doubt. Most people prefer the safety of ready-made answers, whether religious, political, or scientific, over facing the uncertainty of having no fixed manual for life. Questioning dogmas often means facing resistance, criticism, and even social isolation. Nietzsche knew that this solitude is almost inevitable. Those who leave the herd are rarely welcomed by it. Second, being a free spirit is not just about rejecting all established ideas. It's easy to fall into the trap of simply flipping a dogma without truly overcoming it, swapping one rigid belief for another, just with the opposite sign. A free spirit doesn't replace one master with another. They learn to be their own master. This means always being open to revising their views, willing to change position when new arguments or experiences arise, without fearing they'll look inconsistent. This attitude also requires letting go of identity attachments. Many people build their entire sense of self around their beliefs. I am this, I am that, and can't bear to question them. The free spirit understands that changing your mind is not losing yourself, but transforming yourself. As Nietzsche emphasized, become who you are doesn't mean uncovering some fixed essence, but fully developing the potential for change and creation we all carry. In practical terms, living as a free spirit means exploring possibilities without clinging to labels. It could mean changing careers after years of stability because a new passion calls more strongly. It could mean traveling to places and cultures that challenge your ideas instead of confirming them. It could mean letting go of a worldview that no longer serves you, even if it was once a big part of your life. It's about choosing life as a field for experimentation, not as a test of loyalty to a code. Nietzsche connects the free spirit to intellectual honesty. That means not deceiving yourself just to preserve psychological comfort. It means having the courage to see reality without filters, even if it's harsh, and still finding reasons to act and create. A free spirit doesn't need comforting illusions to live. They prefer uncomfortable clarity over cozy lies. This honesty is an antidote to resentment because it stops us from blaming the world for not meeting our expectations. Instead, we aim to understand and act. But this freedom has a price. The absence of fixed certainties can be dizzying. It's like walking without crutches, harder, but also more agile. Nietzsche knew that not everyone is willing to pay that price. For some, radical freedom is an unbearable weight. For others, it's the only way to truly breathe. Being a free spirit means accepting that life offers no guarantees, only possibilities, and that it's our task to explore them. At a deeper level, the free spirit is also a culture maker. By freeing themselves from dogmas, they clear the way for others to question as well. Their life becomes proof that it's possible to live without depending on inherited truths. This role is both inspiring and dangerous. inspiring because it shows new ways of living, dangerous because it threatens structures built on blind obedience. It's important to note that a free spirit doesn't live cut off from the world. They interact, form bonds, and take part in communities, but they refuse to be imprisoned by them. They know that no idea, group, or cause deserves our unconditional loyalty. The greatest commitment is to one's own integrity and to the life that grows from it. This isn't selfishness. It's the understanding that without autonomy, every contribution becomes mere repetition. Nietzsche saw the free spirit as preparation for the rise of the Übermensch, the overman who creates their own values. The free spirit clears the ground, dismantling illusions, questioning absolute truths, and making room for new meanings. They're not just a critic, but an explorer. Their vision isn't limited to what already exists. They seek what has yet to be created. In the metaphor of life as a game, the free spirit is the player who isn't satisfied with the rules already written. They test new strategies, invent moves, and change the board when it limits creativity. That doesn't mean ignoring existing rules entirely. Sometimes they use them strategically, but they never forget they can modify or discard them if they no longer serve life. Ultimately, being a free spirit is about living with curiosity and courage. It's waking up each day ready to explore, not because the world promises safety, but because it offers endless possibilities. It's accepting that we don't know everything, and that's exactly why we can discover so much more. It's turning your own life into an intellectual and existential adventure where every step is an act of creation. Seeing life as art isn't just a pretty metaphor, it's a radical existential proposal. It means viewing your own existence as a work in progress, not a mechanical piece following an instruction manual, but a unique creation that demands sensitivity, skill, and boldness. If the world is a space of chaos, uncertainty, and constant change, it's up to the individual to shape that chaos into something with form, color, and personal meaning. This idea appears throughout Nietzsche's work, but it gains strength in The Birth of Tragedy, where he contrasts the Apollonian impulse, order, form, measure, with the Dionysian impulse, chaos, passion, excess. For him, great art, and by extension, a great life, is born from a dynamic balance between these two forces. We don't live just to impose order, nor simply to throw ourselves into chaos. We live to dance between them, creating beauty out of tension. Seeing life as art requires a shift in mindset. Instead of asking, "What is the meaning of life?" as if there were a universal answer, we start asking, "What meaning do I want to create?" An artist doesn't wait for someone to tell them what to make. They experiment, make mistakes, start over, blend influences, and create something that didn't exist before. Likewise, the person who sees life as art doesn't live to follow inherited scripts. They compose their own melody. This approach goes directly against the idea that life is just about fulfilling duties or chasing external rewards. Just as a work of art isn't valuable only because of its final result, but also because of its creative process, life doesn't need to be justified by an ultimate destination or by others' approval. It's justified when it's lived with intensity, authenticity, and creativity. Shaping chaos, however, doesn't mean eliminating it. Chaos is inevitable. Losses, sudden changes, challenges, and failures are all part of life. An artist doesn't try to erase every unwanted mark on the canvas. They integrate them, turning mistakes into elements that enrich the composition. Nietzsche saw this ability to turn hardship into beauty as a sign of strength, a concrete application of the will to power. It's the opposite of resentment, which only reacts and complains. It's creative action in the face of the inevitable. Practically speaking, living as the artist of your own life means accepting that you are responsible for the shape it takes. That doesn't mean you control every circumstance, but you have the freedom to choose how to respond to them. You might turn an ordinary job into a space for learning and expression, cultivate relationships that inspire you, develop projects that move you, or explore cultures and experiences that broaden your worldview. Every choice is a stroke on the canvas, and it's up to you to decide whether it's made with haste and carelessness or with intention and attention. Nietzsche also warns that living as an artist requires the courage to step away from average taste. The art that truly defines an era rarely pleases everyone right away. Often, it provokes, unsettles, and challenges conventions. The same goes for a creative life. Those who shape their own meaning may be seen as strange or too much by people who prefer ready-made paths. But it's exactly that uniqueness that gives the work its value. Another key aspect of this vision is embracing the unfinished. A work of art is never completely done in an absolute sense. It could always be reworked, reinterpreted, revised. Life, in the same way, is an ongoing creative process. You can change styles, try new colors, abandon one project, and start another. This flexibility doesn't fit with rigid morality or the search for a fixed state of perfection. The artist knows that beauty lives in movement. Nietzsche also saw art as a way to overcome nihilism. When we realize there's no pre-given universal meaning, we risk feeling that nothing matters. Life as art offers the way out. If meaning isn't given, we can create it. The void isn't an abyss, it's a blank canvas. And as every artist knows, a blank canvas is intimidating, but also full of possibilities. In the metaphor of life as a game, living as art means playing not just to win according to someone else's rules, but to make each move interesting, beautiful, and meaningful to yourself. It's not about having the most organized board or the strongest pieces, but about creating a game worth remembering, and maybe even worth playing again. This approach doesn't eliminate discipline or skill. Great artists don't depend only on inspiration. They develop their craft, study references, and practice daily. In the same way, creating an authentic life requires conscious effort. You have to learn from experience, build habits that support your projects, and keep curiosity and openness alive. Creative freedom isn't total disorder. It's discipline in the service of invention. In the end, thinking of life as art means accepting that we are both the author and the main character. We are the ones painting, but also the ones living inside the painting. This puts us in a unique position. We can feel and create, suffer and transform, make mistakes and start over. And all of that becomes part of the singular beauty of our existence. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche describes 3 transformations of the spirit: the camel, the lion, and finally, the child. Each image represents a stage in human development toward true freedom. The camel stands for obedience and endurance under heavy burdens. The lion symbolizes rebellion and the destruction of old chains. But it's the child that embodies the highest stage, playful freedom and the constant invention of new rules. The creative child is not a return to immaturity, but the peak of a process of self-overcoming. After carrying the weight of tradition, camel, and breaking free from external constraints, lion, the spirit finally reaches the lightness of creation. At this stage, there's no longer a need to fight against everything, because the main battle, winning autonomy, has already been fought. Now the challenge is to live as a creator, able to play with existence and invent meaning. The child symbolizes the ability to start fresh, to look at the world without the heavy baggage of the past. It's the mindset of someone who sees possibilities where others see limitations and feels free to change the rules when they no longer serve life. This freedom isn't irresponsibility. It's a serious kind of play where imagination joins courage to shape the new. For Nietzsche, the creative child is the opposite of the resentful spirit. Resentment keeps looking back, trapped in old wounds and injustices. The creative child looks forward, busy exploring and inventing. They don't just react to the world, they reinvent it. And in that sense, they're also the opposite of the conformist. While the conformist clings to existing rules, the creative child treats them like pieces of a toy that can be rearranged into something new. In practical terms, this image invites us to embrace experimentation. It means allowing ourselves to try new ways of living, even at the risk of failing. Just as children play without worrying about losing, because for them, the game is in the act of playing, the creative adult learns to value the process as much as the result. It's the willingness to explore a new career, start a creative project, change your routine, travel somewhere unfamiliar, or learn a skill with no immediate use. The creative child also represents a different relationship with rules. Unlike the obedient spirit who follows them blindly, or the rebellious spirit who rejects them on principle, the creative child understands that rules can be tools. They use them when they enrich the game and drop them when they begin to stifle imagination. This flexibility is key to living creatively. It keeps rules from turning into invisible prisons. Nietzsche connects this mindset to the Dionysian spirit, the ability to affirm life in all its variety, even in what is uncertain, imperfect, or painful. The creative child doesn't try to control the world to make it safe and predictable. They adapt, improvise, and turn challenges into opportunities to make something new. It's the attitude of someone who dances with chaos instead of trying to banish it. In the metaphor of life as a game, the creative child is the player who invents new games within the game. They don't just play, they modify the board, create new pieces, and change the goal once the old one has been reached. This approach is liberating because it gives us back creative control over our own existence without leaving us trapped by past victories or old defeats. However, reaching this stage takes more than just wanting it. You have to go through the earlier phases, bearing burdens, camel, and breaking chains, lion. Without those, the child might just be an immature adult avoiding responsibility. The true creative child is born of maturity. They know the weight of rules and the struggle to break free from them, and that's exactly why they can now play at making their own. In today's world, this metaphor is especially powerful. Many feel crushed by the rigidity of social, political, and economic systems, or stuck in an empty rebellion that only tears down without building anything new. The creative child offers an alternative, not just resisting what exists, but creating what doesn't yet exist. This applies to art, science, relationships, and even the way we choose to live. Cultivating this mindset means regaining curiosity and openness to the unexpected. It means asking yourself, what new rules can I create today to make my life more alive? It could be as simple as changing how you work, reordering your priorities, or adopting a fresh perspective on people and situations. This constant movement is what keeps life from going stale. Nietzsche didn't see the creative child as a distant, unreachable ideal, but as a real possibility for those willing to take on the challenge of reinventing themselves. What makes it rare is the difficulty of letting go of both blind obedience and endless rebellion. The creative child doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. They're too busy creating. And that's what makes them free. Ultimately, the creative child reminds us that life doesn't have to be only endured or fought. It can be played. Not in the sense of being shallow, but in the deepest sense of a game where every move is chosen with freedom and joy. It's the highest expression of the will to power, creating yourself and the world around you, not out of obligation, but from pure vital impulse. Living this way means always being at the beginning, even after a long road traveled. It's having the courage to start over as many times as needed, always with the same energy as someone picking up a brand new toy for the first time. And perhaps this, for Nietzsche, is the fullest form of freedom. Tragic humor is one of the most unique attitudes Nietzsche invites us to adopt toward life. It's the ability to laugh and dance in the face of the absurd, turning inevitable suffering into raw material for aesthetic creation. This idea grows out of Nietzsche's dialogue with Greek tragedy, especially the figure of Dionysus, the god of ecstasy, disorder, and renewal. Instead of denying suffering or pretending it doesn't exist, tragic humor embraces it as an inseparable part of life's beauty and intensity. In The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche describes how the ancient Greeks didn't hide from human pain and mortality. On the contrary, they created grand works of art that fused suffering and celebration. For them, tragedy wasn't pessimism. It was a way to affirm life in its entirety. Light and shadow, joy and pain. Tragic humor inherits this vision. laughing not in spite of suffering, but also because of it, recognizing that life's fragility is precisely what makes it precious. Laughing in the face of tragedy isn't a sign of insensitivity. It's a sign of strength. It's the refusal to let pain define or paralyze us. Nietzsche rejects both the posture of resentment, which turns pain into a weapon against the world, and passive nihilism, which sees pain as a reason to give up. Tragic humor offers a third path: to accept the weight of existence and still play with it. This attitude requires an inner transformation. Instead of viewing suffering as injustice or punishment, we see it as an inevitable element in the game of life. Just as an interesting game includes obstacles and risks, an intense life includes loss, failure, and challenge. Tragic humor lets us face those moments without losing our smile, because we understand they're part of the dance. Nietzsche often uses the image of dance as a metaphor for lightness in the face of tragedy. To dance doesn't mean denying the solid ground of reality. It means moving over it with grace, even when it's uneven or unstable. Laughing and dancing in the face of the absurd is, therefore, an act of freedom. The world may be unpredictable and at times harsh, but we can still choose how we relate to it. This shows up in everyday life in many ways. It might be the ability to find humor in your own mistakes, keeping wounded pride from turning into bitterness. It might be using irony to navigate oppressive situations, breaking their weight and exposing their contradictions. It might be telling hard stories with a spark in your eyes, turning scars into narratives that inspire. Tragic humor is also a form of resistance against a culture that tries to deny or mask suffering. We live in a time that prizes the appearance of constant happiness, as if life could be edited to show only the highlights. Nietzsche would see this as a flattening of human experience. Tragic humor, on the other hand, accepts that life is made of highs and lows, and turns that acceptance into style, courage, and even beauty. Here, there's a deep connection to the will to power. Transforming pain into creation expands life instead of shrinking it. Tragic humor doesn't wait for the storm to pass before dancing. It dances in the middle of it. That's the mark of someone who has mastered the art of living. In the metaphor of the game of life, tragic humor is the ability to keep playing with a smile, even when the cards aren't in your favor. It's refusing to take yourself so seriously that you forget we're all part of a game with a board far bigger than us. That awareness protects us from absolute despair and from the moral rigidity that fears improvisation. Nietzsche knew not everyone can sustain this posture. It takes real inner strength to laugh at what wounds us, and even more, to turn it into something beautiful. That's why tragic humor is a sign of spiritual maturity. It's not the shallow joy that runs from pain, but the deep joy that moves through it and comes out transformed. Culturally, this vision inspires artists, writers, and thinkers who turn painful experiences into works that blend beauty and melancholy, critique and lightness. Tragic humor isn't empty entertainment. It's creation with depth, capable of sparking reflection while easing life's weight. It teaches us that laughing can be as philosophical as thinking. Nietzsche's lesson here is clear. We can't control life's absurdity, but we can choose our choreography in the face of it. We can shrink back, nurse resentment, or give up. Or we can laugh, dance, and create, becoming artists of our own existence. That's why tragic humor isn't just a coping technique, but a life ethic. To live in such a way that even pain becomes part of a work beautiful enough to be worth repeating. The danger of nihilism is one of the central themes in Nietzsche's philosophy. He doesn't treat it as a distant problem or something limited to intellectuals, but as a real threat to anyone who realizes there's no universal meaning or absolute value already given to life. When Nietzsche describes life as a game without fixed rules, he knows that this freedom can be liberating for some, but paralyzing for many. Because if everything is a game, the unsettling question arises: does anything really matter? In its simplest form, nihilism is the feeling that nothing matters. It's the draining of meaning, the realization that there's no greater why guiding our existence. This experience can emerge when old beliefs, dogmas, or values collapse, and nothing new has yet taken their place. It's like tearing down an old house and realizing you don't yet have a blueprint for a new one. The land is empty, and that emptiness can feel overwhelming. Nietzsche distinguishes between two main types of nihilism: passive and active. Passive nihilism is marked by giving up. It's when, faced with the absence of a ready-made meaning, a person withdraws, loses motivation, and sinks into apathy. It's a letting life pass by without the energy to create anything new. Active nihilism, on the other hand, also destroys inherited values, but with the intention of clearing space for new ones. It's destructive in the short term, but constructive in the long term. Nietzsche sees active nihilism as a necessary step toward the revaluation of values. The greater danger lies in passive nihilism because it doesn't generate movement. In it, the radical freedom of having no universal rules isn't used to create, but to justify doing nothing. It's like looking at the game board of life and saying, if the rules aren't real, why play at all? The result is a loss of vitality, the feeling of just serving time, with no passion or purpose. Nietzsche saw this risk clearly in the modern context, when religious beliefs and metaphysical certainties were collapsing for much of European society. His famous phrase, "God is dead," is not a cry of celebration, but a diagnosis. The main source of meaning for many people had vanished, and what remained was the challenge of creating new ones. Without that creation, the vacuum left by the dead God could lead to paralyzing nihilism. The link between nihilism and the metaphor of life as a game is direct. If we see the game only as a meaningless pastime, it can feel empty. If we see it as a creative space, it can become the most intense of experiences. The difference lies in how we respond to the fact that there are no fixed rules. The passive nihilist concludes that nothing is worth it. The creator concludes that anything is possible. Overcoming the danger of nihilism, for Nietzsche, requires courage and will to power. You have to use freedom not to retreat, but to invent values, projects, ways of living. The absence of a universal meaning doesn't mean the absence of meaning. It means that meaning has to be built. And this building isn't just intellectual, it's practical. It's not enough to think up new values, you have to live them. On a personal level, recognizing the risk of nihilism can help us catch ourselves when we've fallen into the trap of apathy. It might show up as chronic lack of motivation, disinterest in new experiences, or the constant feeling that nothing matters. In these moments, Nietzsche's answer isn't to go hunting for a new absolute rule to save us, but to start acting, even without guarantees. It's in movement that life regains its color. Nietzsche also warns of a subtle trap, disguised nihilism. Sometimes we follow social patterns or external goals without really believing in them, just to avoid facing the void. We work, consume, accumulate, but deep down, we feel none of it means anything. For Nietzsche, this mechanical way of living is just another form of nihilism because it lacks genuine creation. Culturally, nihilism can spread when a society loses faith in its core values but fails to create new ones. The result is an atmosphere of widespread cynicism where everything is seen as self-interest, manipulation, or illusion. In such an environment, it becomes hard to mobilize collective energy for projects that go beyond the immediate. Nietzsche saw this as a civilizational risk. Without shared meaning, a culture can slide into decline. The solution, for him, isn't to go back to old dogmas, but to move through nihilism. That means accepting it as a diagnosis, but not as a destiny. First, face the truth. There are no guarantees, no universal script, no given meaning. Then, use that absence as an invitation to create. If nothing is written, everything can be written. That's the leap from nihilism to creative affirmation. In the game of life, this means accepting that the board is open and the pieces can be moved in new ways. The danger lies in quitting the game. The power lies in reinventing it. The same realization that can lead to paralysis, nothing matters, can also lead to freedom. I can create anything. The difference is in the courage to take responsibility for your own work of art. When Nietzsche talks about breaking free from the herd morality and creating your own values, he doesn't romanticize freedom as something light and effortless. On the contrary, he recognizes that true freedom carries an immense weight. Making your own rules can be far harder than following the ones already in place. Because when you do it, you take full responsibility for your choices and for the meaning of your life. When we live under inherited rules, religious, political, cultural, life can feel simpler. There's a ready-made code to guide decisions, a set of pre-packaged answers to ethical dilemmas, a manual that spares us from constant reflection. It offers psychological safety. We don't have to ask ourselves at every turn if we're on the right path, because the authority has already decided. But as Nietzsche points out, that safety comes at the cost of autonomy. We end up living according to a plan that isn't our own. The kind of freedom Nietzsche proposes is radical. Not just freedom to choose from a list of preset options, but the freedom to create the options yourself. This means you can no longer blame outside rules when something goes wrong. If the rules are yours, so are the consequences. And that's where the weight of freedom comes in. That weight first shows up as uncertainty. Once you abandon a fixed code, you give up guarantees. There's no way to know for sure if the rules you create will lead to a better or worse life. You have to test, correct, and adjust. Like an artist experimenting with strokes and colors without knowing beforehand if the result will be beautiful or not. This uncertainty can be anxiety-inducing, especially for someone used to the stability of ready-made values. The second aspect of this weight is loneliness. When you make your own rules, you may drift away from social consensus. Friends, family, and community might not understand or approve of your path. Nietzsche knew that a free spirit often has to endure periods of isolation, not because they reject people, but because their way of living doesn't fit collective expectations. Freedom demands the courage to be misunderstood. The third aspect is the demand for energy. Creating values and ways of life is constant work. Unlike following inherited rules, which only requires obedience, inventing requires attention, reflection, and the willingness to reassess choices. It's an active process that never ends, because as life changes, your rules must change too. This calls for a kind of discipline that isn't imposed from the outside, but cultivated from within. Nietzsche doesn't propose this freedom because it's easy. He does it because it's the only way to live authentically. Following inherited rules may be comfortable, but it's like living out someone else's script. Writing your own rules, no matter how difficult, means living as the author and main character of your own story. In practical terms, the weight of freedom can be felt in decisions like changing careers, breaking from family patterns, adopting an unconventional lifestyle, or setting personal boundaries that go against others' expectations. These choices often leave you without external support, forcing you to rely on your own vision and judgment. That's when freedom stops being an abstract ideal and becomes a concrete experience, with risks and consequences. Nietzsche knew not everyone can bear this weight. Many prefer the safety of heteronomy, living under rules made by others, because it gives a sense of order and belonging. But for someone who chooses freedom, there's no going back without feeling like they're betraying themselves. Once you realize you can make your own rules, following inherited ones without questioning them becomes an even heavier burden. This weight is also tied to the idea of amor fati, the love of fate. Making your own rules means fully accepting the consequences of your choices, good or bad. There's no room for paralyzing regret. Instead, there's the need to turn every outcome into part of the work you're building. That acceptance brings a kind of lightness inside the weight. When you own everything you create, you stop dividing life into my fault versus the rule's fault. In the metaphor of life as a game, the weight of freedom is like playing without a manual. It's exciting because you can invent new ways to win, or even redefine what winning means. But it's also challenging because there's no one to turn to when a move fails. You have to learn from every mistake and use it to create better rules that align with who you are. The strength to carry this weight comes from the will to power, the creative energy that pushes life to grow and affirm itself. Without that force, freedom can turn into unproductive chaos. With it, the weight becomes not just a burden, but a lever, something that pushes you to grow and explore. For Nietzsche, living is, inevitably, taking part in a game of masks. This isn't just an aesthetic metaphor. It reveals something deep about the human condition. Even when we believe we're acting in a completely free and authentic way, our actions are shaped by roles, performances, and expectations, our own and those of others. Masks aren't always tools for deception. Often they're necessary for moving through the world. Nietzsche saw life as a stage where everyone, consciously or not, plays roles. This doesn't mean we're hypocritical by nature. It means that social interaction and identity building always involve some level of performance. A mask can be a smile in the middle of pain, a formal tone in a work meeting, or the free spirit persona someone puts on, even while feeling deep doubts inside. What Nietzsche criticizes is not the mask itself, but forgetting that it is a mask. The danger comes when we confuse a temporary role with the entirety of who we are. When we believe our identity is fixed and final, we stop exploring the many possibilities of existence. We start defending the mask as if it were our own skin. The game of masks is inevitable because we live in relation to others. In different contexts, family, work, friendships, social media, we adapt the way we speak, act, and even think. This isn't always a sign of dishonesty. Often, it's just social intelligence, the ability to communicate in different languages. The real question is, are we consciously choosing the masks we wear, or are we trapped in them without even noticing? Nietzsche invites us to take an active role in this game. If we must wear masks, let them be chosen with awareness and purpose, not imposed by the herd or by inherited values. We can use them to create, protect, and express different sides of ourselves, without becoming prisoners of any single one. In this sense, a mask can be a work of art, a character we invent to explore a lifestyle, a project, or a relationship. Freedom here doesn't mean living without masks. That's impossible. It means knowing how to change them, reinvent them, and most importantly, recognize when it's time to take them off. The problem starts when we think one version of ourselves should work for every situation. It's like an actor who refuses to step out of character, even when the play is over. In practical terms, this means being aware of our roles. We can be competent professionals at work, caring parents at home, fun friends at parties, and thoughtful individuals in solitude. And all these masks can be genuine expressions of who we are. What Nietzsche rejects is the idea that one of them, on its own, defines our entire identity. By embracing multiplicity, we avoid the emptiness of living as just one character. This awareness also protects us from the illusion of total freedom, which, in practice, might just mean swapping one mask for another. Someone who abandons traditional morality to live as a rebel might still just be performing a new role, with its own rules and expectations. The difference is realizing that even the rebel wears a mask, and knowing when it works and when it's time to let it go. Nietzsche ties this to the idea that absolute truth is unreachable. We live surrounded by interpretations, ours and others, and each mask is a form of interpretation. The game of masks, then, isn't an obstacle to truth, but the very way we relate to reality. Recognizing this frees us from the hunt for a pure essence and invites us to try out different ways of being. In the metaphor of life as a game, masks are like avatars we choose to play with. Each avatar has its own skills, limits, and style, and we can switch between them depending on the challenge. Playing well doesn't mean picking only one avatar forever. It means mastering the art of switching between them with intention. The mistake is forgetting we're playing at all and thinking we are, permanently, just that one character. This Nietzschean perspective also helps us deal with other people's masks. Instead of demanding absolute authenticity, which is impossible, We can learn to read and respect the role someone is playing at that moment. That doesn't mean accepting lies or manipulation, but recognizing that everyone shifts between versions of themselves to handle different situations. Far from being a problem to eliminate, the game of masks can be a space for creation. We can use it to test new ways of thinking, feeling, and acting. We can invent characters that push us out of our comfort zone or help us tap into dormant potential. It's a game where the goal isn't to find out who we really are, as if there were one single answer, but to expand who we can be. Nietzsche often invites us to be suspicious of what we call natural or obvious in human behavior. Much of what we believe are free choices is, in reality, an unconscious submission to rules imposed by culture. These rules shape what we see as right or wrong, beautiful or ugly, desirable or undesirable. And they do so deeply that we often don't even notice we're following a script written by someone else. For Nietzsche, culture is a creative force, but it can also be a force of domestication. It gives us language, symbols, values, and references that make life in community possible. But these same elements can also become rigid molds, limiting our ability to create something new. The problem isn't culture itself, but our tendency to accept it as an unchangeable destiny without ever questioning its foundations. Cultural rules often present themselves as obvious truths. That's just the way things are, or it's always been done this way. For Nietzsche, such statements are signs that we're dealing with crystallized values, inherited from past generations and kept alive out of habit or convenience. The herd morality he criticizes is largely sustained by these unquestioned rules. A classic example is the ideal of success. In many cultures, success is defined by material wealth, social status, and public recognition. The pressure to follow this model is so strong that even people who don't fully agree with it often feel like failures if they don't meet those standards. That feeling doesn't come from personal reflection. It comes from unconsciously internalizing a cultural script. Another example is the idea of the right life tied to certain social milestones. Getting married, having children, following a straight career path, retiring, and then resting. For some, this path is genuinely fulfilling. For others, it's just the automatic fulfillment of collective expectations. Nietzsche would say that following this script without examining it means giving up the chance to create a life that's truly your own. These rules also shape our moral judgments. What we call virtue or vice often reflects historical and power interests more than universal principles. In On the Genealogy of Morality, Nietzsche shows how values like humility and obedience, praised by Christianity, arose in a context of resentment and the need for social control. Today, we may repeat them as moral ideals without realizing their origins or purposes. Questioning these rules doesn't mean rejecting everything culture offers. It means separating what truly serves our life from what only keeps us tied to outdated patterns. It's an exercise in clarity, asking, where did this rule come from? Who benefits from it? And does it actually make my life stronger, or does it just make me conform? This kind of questioning is part of Nietzsche's idea of the revaluation of values. The challenge is that many of these rules are so deeply rooted that they blend with our identity. When we try to question them, we may feel fear, guilt, or shame. That's because culture doesn't just impose external behaviors, it shapes our own sense of who we are. Nietzsche knew that breaking certain rules often means breaking with the image others have of us, and even with the image we have of ourselves. In practical terms, this reflection turns into the courage to make choices that go against the grain. It might mean rejecting a stable job to pursue a creative project, even if others don't understand. It might mean choosing a minimalist lifestyle in a society obsessed with consumption. It might mean rethinking relationships, gender roles, family models, or spiritual paths we've inherited without ever evaluating. In the metaphor of life as a game, cultural rules are like old board game instructions no one remembers writing, but everyone follows. Often, they no longer fit the game we're actually playing, but they remain in place because that's how it's always been. Questioning these rules means asking whether they still make sense for the game we want to play, and if they don't, having the courage to change or discard them. Nietzsche warns that doing this will provoke resistance. Culture protects itself. Those who question too much can be seen as a threat to group cohesion. That's why he values the role of the free spirit, the one who, even in the face of criticism, keeps exploring possibilities and creating new ways of living. The goal isn't to destroy culture, but to renew it. Recognizing the rules imposed by culture also helps us be more tolerant of others' choices. Realizing that many people are following unconscious scripts reminds us that we're all influenced, to some degree, by collective forces. The difference lies in how aware we are of that influence, and in how much we can transform it into something that truly belongs to us. Nietzsche never fooled himself into thinking that human relationships are built only on selfless cooperation. While solidarity and mutual support are real and important, he saw in our interactions an unavoidable layer of competition, strategy, and the drive for influence. What we can call the game of power. This game isn't limited to obvious clashes, like wars or formal competitions. It also plays out in subtle, everyday negotiations, in politics, in the economy, at work, in relationships, and even in the way we present ourselves socially. It's part of the human condition because, for Nietzsche, all life is an expression of the will to power, the drive to expand and assert one's existence. What he questioned was the moralistic illusion that we can live completely outside these dynamics. Traditional morality, especially herd morality, tends to idealize harmony and label conflict as purely negative. But for Nietzsche, conflict isn't necessarily destructive. It can be creative, sparking growth, innovation, and self-overcoming. The problem isn't that the game of power exists, but that so many people lack the awareness and skill to play it in a creative way. The game of power may start with competition over space and resources, but it goes far beyond that. It's also about the battle over narratives. Who gets to define what's right? Who decides what's desirable? Who can get others to accept their ideas as if they were universal truths? Nietzsche invites us to see that many so-called moral values are, in reality, the victories of certain individuals or groups in this symbolic game. The genealogy of morality, as he explores in his work, is also a record of wins and losses in this arena. On a personal level, the game of power shows up in small, everyday gestures. It can be who speaks the most in a meeting, who can steer a conversation toward their own goals, or who subtly influences decisions without giving direct orders. It's not just manipulation, it's strategy, and it can be used for selfish purposes or for collective benefit. Nietzsche warns that recognizing the game is essential. Ignoring it doesn't put you above it, it just makes you an unaware and vulnerable player. People who think they live outside the game are usually just playing badly, serving the interests of those who know how to move the pieces. The first step, then, is awareness. Knowing when you're in a contest, what forces are in play, and what tools you have at your disposal. The second step is deciding how to play. Nietzsche doesn't give a strict ethical rulebook, but he values creativity and life affirmation as guiding principles. Playing well isn't about winning at any cost. It's about finding strategies that strengthen your power without reducing yourself to a reactive or resentful state. Sometimes that means confronting directly. Other times, it means stepping back to prepare for a stronger move later. In the metaphor of life as a game, the game of power is like a match where the rules aren't always clear and alliances can shift overnight. You need to learn to read the board and anticipate moves. That takes both practical intelligence and self-control. Because, as Nietzsche points out, no external victory is worth losing your own integrity and vitality. He also encourages us to see the game of power as a creative opportunity. Just like in art, tension can be turned into something productive and even beautiful. Intellectual rivalries can produce new ideas. Artistic competition can spark innovation. Challenges at work can drive real improvement. The game doesn't have to be zero-sum. It can expand the possibilities for everyone involved. Still, Nietzsche doesn't ignore the risks. Getting too attached to the game of power can lead to a life focused only on beating others instead of surpassing yourself. When the will to power decays into the will to dominate, we lose the creative side of it and fall into the trap of measuring our worth only by someone else's defeat. For him, true strength lies in expanding your own life, not in shrinking someone else's. In today's world, the game of power is even more complex because it often plays out in invisible arenas: social media, the press, algorithms, and political language. Now, it's not enough to have power. You have to look like you have power. This symbolic side means you have to be not just a player, but the narrator of your own story. In this sense, Nietzsche encourages us not to rely only on official rules, but to create narratives that reflect our values and strengthen our presence in the world. In the end, the game of power is inevitable, but it doesn't have to mean oppression. It can be a space to exercise the will to power, to build skills, to test limits, and to create new ways of relating to others. The difference lies in awareness. Those who know it's a game can choose their strategies. Those who don't are just pieces moved by someone else. Dionysian joy is one of Nietzsche's most vibrant and inspiring ideas. It comes from his reading of the Greek spirit and the figure of Dionysus, the god of wine, dance, fertility, and the breaking of rigid boundaries. But more than a mythological symbol, Dionysus represents, for Nietzsche, an existential attitude, embracing chaos, change, and impermanence as an essential part of life's game. In The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche describes two fundamental forces that shape culture and life: the Apollonian, tied to order, form, and measure, and the Dionysian, tied to excess, flow, and the dissolving of boundaries. Great art, and by extension a great life, comes from the creative tension between these two forces. Dionysian joy is the ability to give yourself over to life's chaotic and ever-changing side without fear, seeing it not as a threat, but as a source of vitality. To an Apollonian mindset, chaos is something to be controlled, tamed, or eliminated. To the Dionysian attitude, chaos is part of life's beauty. It's where transformation, surprise, and reinvention come from. Nietzsche saw in the Dionysian the energy that keeps life from becoming stagnant. The joy he celebrates isn't the shallow kind that ignores problems, but the deep joy of dancing even when the music changes unexpectedly. This joy takes a kind of courage, the courage to live without guarantees, knowing nothing is fixed and everything is subject to change. In life's game, it means not just accepting that the rules change, but actually getting excited about the chance to play in new ways. It's letting go of the illusion that happiness depends on absolute stability and instead finding pleasure in improvisation. In practice, Dionysian joy shows up in many ways. It's the ability to laugh at yourself when you make mistakes or fail, instead of freezing in shame. It's the willingness to try unknown paths, even when you have no idea where they lead. It's the skill of turning losses into opportunities for growth, recognizing that every ending carries the seed of a new beginning. It's also the art of celebrating small moments of beauty and pleasure, even in hard times. Nietzsche saw this attitude as an antidote to nihilism. When we realize there's no pre-written universal meaning, we risk feeling like nothing matters. Dionysian joy offers a different view. If nothing is written, then everything can be written. Chaos isn't emptiness, it's potential. Every change is a chance to create. This is one of the most powerful ways to affirm life. On a cultural level, Dionysian joy is a force for renewal. Societies that cling too tightly to Apollonian rules end up suffocating creativity and diversity. The Dionysian spirit breaks those structures open, reminding us that life isn't a static monument, it's a festival in constant transformation. That doesn't mean destroying all order, but letting order breathe and evolve over time. On a personal level, embracing Dionysian joy is an act of liberation. Many of us grew up believing we have to control every aspect of life to be happy. Nietzsche invites us to flip that logic. The more we try to control everything, the more frustrated we become. The more we learn to dance with the unexpected, the more we find happiness in surprising places. This dance isn't passivity, it's active participation in life's flow. The dance metaphor is central here. In dance, there's technique, but also improvisation. There's rhythm, but also room for variation. You can't predict every step, and that's exactly what makes it alive. Dionysian joy is living like that, with attention, but without rigidity, with presence, but without clinging to fixed forms. It's playing the game of life as a celebration, not just as a race to win. Nietzsche knew this attitude isn't easy. Uncertainty can be scary, and chaos can seem threatening. That's why Dionysian joy requires training, learning to trust yourself and your ability to create meaning even in the most unpredictable situations. It means cultivating a flexible mind and an open heart so that change is seen as a partner, not an enemy. In today's world, this idea is more relevant than ever. We live in times of rapid change. Technology, culture, relationships, and even concepts of identity shift at dizzying speed. Clinging to these changes with rigid Apollonian control can lead to anxiety and a constant sense of losing control. A Dionysian approach, on the other hand, lets us navigate these turbulent waters with more lightness, using the waves to push the boat forward instead of fighting against the current. In the metaphor of life as a game, there's a fascinating tension. We are, at the same time, both a piece and a player. We create rules, invent moves, and choose strategies. But we're also subject to chance, circumstances, and outside forces we can't control. This dual condition is one of the most challenging and enriching parts of existence. As players, we experience the creative freedom Nietzsche defends, the ability to revalue values, break away from herd morality, and shape the meaning of our lives the way an artist shapes their work. As pieces, we live on a board we didn't fully choose. We're born into a specific time, place, culture, and body, with limitations and contexts that influence our possibilities. Nietzsche doesn't deny the weight of these external forces. He knows no individual is a completely autonomous island. Genetics, history, social environment, unexpected events, all of these act on us. The difference is, he refuses to accept that these forces completely determine who we are. For him, human greatness lies in playing creatively, even with the cards we didn't choose. This awareness of being both piece and player invites a balanced mindset. If we believe we're only pieces, we fall into fatalism. There's no point in doing anything. It's all already decided. If we believe we're only players, we fall into the illusion of total control, ignoring that chance can radically change the course of the game. Real power lies in acting with intensity in the areas we can influence and accepting with courage what's beyond us. Nietzsche finds a connection here with the idea of amor fati, love of fate. This doesn't mean passive resignation, but the ability to affirm life as it is, including the parts we didn't choose. It's saying yes, not only to planned victories, but also to unexpected twists, and finding ways to integrate them into the game creatively. On a practical level, this outlook shows up in many ways. Think of an artist who, faced with an accidental blot on the canvas, decides to incorporate it into the piece, turning a mistake into the centerpiece of the painting. Or an entrepreneur who, after a market failure, discovers a new audience for their product. Or someone who, faced with a physical limitation, reinvents how they express themselves in sports or art. These are examples of people who recognize themselves as pieces, limited by the event, and players, capable of responding creatively. This mindset also helps us deal with frustration. When something is out of our control, it's easy to fall into resentment or self-pity. But by accepting that part of the game is ruled by chance, we can redirect our energy to what's within our reach. That doesn't erase the pain, but it turns it into fuel for action. As Nietzsche might say, what matters is not what happens to us, but what we do with what happens. In the metaphor of the game of life, External forces are like cards dealt to us, or unexpected moves from other players. We might not like them, but we can still decide how to play our hand. Sometimes a bad card can be overcome with strategy. Other times, you have to wait for the next round. Recognizing this, back and forth between control and chance, makes us wiser, more resilient players. Nietzsche also warns about the danger of using chance as an excuse for inaction. Saying, "I didn't get lucky," or "it wasn't meant to be," can be a disguised way of avoiding responsibility. At the same time, blaming only yourself for everything ignores the fact that life is, in part, unpredictable. Clarity comes from taking responsibility where you can and accepting with dignity where you can't. This understanding can also make us more compassionate toward ourselves and others. Knowing everyone is both a piece and a player reminds us that each person faces a unique mix of limitations and possibilities. That doesn't excuse everything, but it helps us avoid simplistic judgments about other people's choices. The condition of being both piece and player also ties into the idea of lifelong learning. As players, we can become more skilled over time. As pieces, we can learn how to position ourselves better within the limits we have. Every move, whether it succeeds or fails, expands our toolkit for future rounds. At its core, this lesson invites us to live with both humility and boldness. Humility to recognize we don't control everything. Boldness to act with strength where we can. It's a rare combination, but essential to avoid both paralysis and arrogance. Nietzsche never saw life as something light or free from pain. On the contrary, he recognized that existence, as beautiful and creative as it can be, is also marked by deep suffering, unexpected losses, and periods of discouragement. Faced with this, it's natural that at certain moments the temptation to quit the game appears. That feeling that continuing to play is just too heavy, and maybe it would be easier to simply stop participating altogether. This temptation can take different forms. Sometimes it shows up as existential fatigue, the sense that every effort seems pointless and nothing we do makes any real difference. At other times, it comes as hopelessness in the face of seemingly insurmountable circumstances, financial crises, serious illness, deep loneliness, repeated failures. And then there's the most extreme form, the desire to end life entirely. Nietzsche doesn't dismiss the legitimacy of this experience. For him, facing life's weight to the point of considering quitting is part of the radical honesty that philosophy demands. Pretending life is always pleasant would be, in his eyes, a self-deception incompatible with true clarity. But at the same time, he offers a way to transform this temptation into something else, a moment of questioning that could open the door to reinvention. That transformation starts with recognizing where the urge to quit comes from. Often, the feeling of "I can't take this anymore" doesn't come from pain alone, but from the belief that the pain has no meaning. What weighs us down isn't just suffering. It's suffering while believing there's no reason to keep going. That's why Nietzsche puts so much emphasis on creating meaning, not as something handed to us, but as something each of us must invent for ourselves. Here, the idea of the eternal return can be a powerful test. Asking yourself, if I had to live this same life over and over forever, would I accept it? Might at first feel crushing to someone in crisis, but Nietzsche's goal isn't to deepen despair, it's to spark reflection. What would need to change in my life for it to be worth repeating? That question can light a creative spark in place of the urge to give up. Another important point is realizing that quitting the game doesn't have to mean ending life itself. It can mean walking away from certain rules, expectations, or roles that have become suffocating. Often, what we really want to end isn't life, but a way of living that no longer works for us. In those cases, quitting can become a creative break. Instead of leaving the game, we radically change how we play it. Nietzsche also reminds us that moments of collapse can become turning points. The temptation to quit can reveal that we've been living under values that aren't truly ours, following rules imposed by culture, family, or fear. Realizing this gives us the chance to revalue, to create a set of values more aligned with our strength and uniqueness. In the metaphor of life as a game, quitting is like dropping your pieces and leaving the table. But there are other options. You can switch boards, reinvent the rules, or change the goal. Sometimes you have to accept that the game you were playing no longer makes sense, and that it's okay to start another. For Nietzsche, that kind of flexibility is a sign of strength, not weakness. This doesn't mean downplaying suffering. Some pains leave us without the energy to move at all. In those moments, maybe the wisest thing to do is simply stay put, breathe, and wait for strength to return. Nietzsche doesn't demand that we're always at our peak. He knows life includes periods of retreat. But even then, the attitude is to prepare to play again, not to shut down the game for good. One key idea that can help in those times is that life doesn't have to be worth it at every single moment to be worth it as a whole. A player can have several bad rounds and still finish the match satisfied. The key is remembering that life works in cycles and meaning can be lost temporarily, only to be found or created again later. Nietzsche also points out that the urge to quit often comes from the weight we carry alone. Sharing that burden with friends, communities, or collective projects doesn't erase the difficulty, but it expands our possibilities for a response. In the game of life, even when we play creatively and independently, we don't play in isolation. In the end, Nietzsche invites us to see the temptation to quit not as a sign of permanent weakness, but as a reminder of our freedom. If we can leave, we can also choose to stay. And when we choose to stay, that decision carries a special weight. It's not obedience to some imposed duty, but a conscious affirmation of life. To remain, in that sense, is a creative act, maybe the most radical one of all. In Nietzsche's view of life as a game, there's a key shift. The value of life isn't in winning according to someone else's standards, but in living each move to the fullest. This perspective breaks from the utilitarian mindset that measures the worth of existence only by the final results, and instead invites us to see life as a performance, something meaningful and beautiful in the very act of living, not just in some supposed end we're trying to reach. For Nietzsche, this attitude is the opposite of the herd mentality, which tends to reduce life to a checklist of predefined goals: financial security, social status, moral approval, public recognition. Often inherited from others, these goals act like trophies in an imaginary championship everyone seems to be competing in, yet few ever question what it all really means. The problem is that by focusing only on the final victory, we lose the quality of the present moment, and ironically, we often never reach that victory anyway, because the rules of the social game are always changing. Existential performance shifts our attention to how we play. The objective result matters less than the intensity, authenticity, and creativity with which we live each moment. It's like theatre or music. The value of the show isn't just in the applause at the end, but in the commitment, presence, and connection throughout the whole performance. This idea echoes Nietzsche's concepts of amor fati, love of fate, and the eternal return. If we had to live each act of our life over and over for eternity, what would truly matter would be the quality of each moment, not just the final outcome. Existential performance, then, is an invitation to live in a way that makes every instant worthwhile in itself, not just as a step towards something else. On a practical level, this approach changes our relationship with goals. Goals still matter, but they stop being the sole justification for life. For example, an athlete isn't defined only by the medals they win, but by the way they train, compete, and engage with their sport. An artist doesn't live just to finish a work, but to explore the creative process. Someone who nurtures friendships doesn't value them only for the result of having friends, but for the lived experience of conversations, gatherings, and shared moments. Nietzsche reminds us that living fully doesn't mean chasing constant pleasure or avoiding hardship. On the contrary, a full existential performance includes risks, mistakes, pain, and lessons learned. The difference is that these aren't seen as interruptions to the game, but as inseparable parts of the match itself. A player who lives this way doesn't freeze after a bad move. They turn it into a chance to learn, or even into a memorable moment. The game metaphor also shows us that existential performance is an art. Playing well requires skill, discipline, focus, preparation, but also improvisation and adaptability. There's no fixed script. Each move demands the sensitivity to read the moment and respond accordingly. This ability isn't mastered all at once. It's developed over a lifetime with practice and reflection. Another essential part of this is freedom from external judgment. When our priority is to win according to other people's rules, we become hostages to their approval. In existential performance, the measure of value comes from within, living so that, looking back, we can feel proud of the intensity and authenticity with which we played. This internal standard is more demanding, but also far more liberating. Nietzsche saw this as a way to overcome nihilism. When life is reduced to external goals, losing them or never achieving them can lead to emptiness. But when meaning comes from living intensely in the moment, even drastic life changes can't take that away. You can lose a job, a relationship, or social status, and still find reasons to keep playing, because the value lies in how you live, not just in what you achieve. Culturally, existential performance is also a form of resistance. We live in societies obsessed with metrics, follow accounts, productivity scores, degrees, net worth. These can have their place, but they don't capture the richness of a life lived with intensity. By focusing on the experience rather than just the result, we break the cycle of constant comparison and open space for more personal, creative ways of living. This doesn't mean giving up ambition or refusing excellence. Quite the opposite. Existential performance seeks excellence in the act of playing itself, not just in the final trophy. It's the excellence of giving your best, not to prove something to others, but because that's when life feels most alive. It's the commitment to never waste a move, not because each one guarantees a win, but because each one is a unique, unrepeatable opportunity. Ultimately, living by this philosophy means accepting that we don't control the final outcome of life's game. Death resets the scoreboard, but we do control how we play while we're here. And if the end is inevitable, the only real measure of value is the quality of our participation. Existential performance is the opposite of living on autopilot. It's presence, commitment, and the awareness that every moment is part of the work of art we're creating. It's not just about winning, it's about making each move an expression of what's most vital in us. And as Nietzsche might say, if we live this way, the question, was it worth it, may give way to a quiet but powerful answer, yes, I'd play it all again. We don't play the game of life just for ourselves. Every move we make, every rule we invent, every way we choose to play, leaves a mark on the board for those who come after us. That's what it means to talk about leaving a legacy for other players. Living in a way that our creations, values, and actions can inspire, challenge, or expand the possibilities of the game for future generations. Nietzsche didn't believe in eternal truths or unchangeable values. Precisely because of that, he clearly saw that all values are human-made and can be recreated. In this context, a legacy isn't about leaving behind a fixed set of rules to be followed forever. It's about creating ways of living so intense and meaningful that they become a starting point for others to explore, adapt, and, if necessary, transform. This legacy can be cultural, philosophical, artistic, political, or deeply personal. It can take the form of ideas that challenge the status quo, works of art that open new forms of expression, or actions that show courage and freedom in ways others hadn't considered before. What matters is that it expands the space of the game instead of restricting it. Nietzsche was wary of legacies that harden into dogma because they end up suffocating the creativity of future generations. A A living legacy encourages more creation, not blind obedience. On a personal level, all of us leave some kind of trace. You don't have to be a famous philosopher, inventor, or celebrated artist to influence other players. We can inspire others by how we face adversity, by the way we live our values, or by our willingness to explore new paths. Often, a living example can have more impact than any written rule. Nietzsche valued the role of the free spirit in this process. The free spirit doesn't create to impose their vision, but to open possibilities. They understand that each player must find their own style, but they also know that watching someone play boldly and creatively can awaken courage in those still afraid to break from the norm. Legacy, in this sense, is less about teaching the right way and more about showing that there are other ways to play. In the metaphor of life as a game, leaving a legacy is like altering the board, so the next players find new routes and challenges. We might change the pieces, invent new combinations of moves, or even create entirely different ways to play. Some of these changes may be adopted, adapted, or rejected by those who come after. And that's healthy, because it keeps the game alive and evolving. Nietzsche also reminds us that a legacy doesn't have to be intentional to exist. Many times, we don't realize that our actions are shaping the possibilities available to others. A child who grows up seeing an adult live authentically may, years later, remember that example as the spark for their own freedom. A co-worker who sees someone take creative risks might quietly gather the courage to change their own path. This means every player, whether they want to or not, influences the collective game. But there's an ethical side to this. Since we can't avoid leaving marks, we can choose what kind of marks we want to leave. We can ask ourselves, do my actions expand life's potential, or do they limit it? Does my example invite courage, or reinforce fear? Do the rules I create encourage others to create, or do they just keep control in my hands? There are no final answers to these questions, but asking them makes us more aware of our impact. Legacy can also be seen as an ongoing conversation with time. We play in a present shaped by the moves and rules of past players. Some we admire, others we question. Our task, in Nietzsche's view, isn't to preserve everything as it is, but to honor what strengthens us and transform what holds us back. In that way, we are both heirs and potential ancestors for those who haven't arrived yet. This perspective reminds us that the game doesn't start or end with us. There's something freeing about that. We don't have to solve everything, but we can contribute to keeping the game evolving. We can plant ideas and practices that might only flourish long after we've left the table. In this sense, legacy isn't about immediate satisfaction. It's about being part of a creative flow that moves through generations. Nietzsche saw this kind of contribution as a form of symbolic immortality, not the static immortality of having your name carved in stone, but the dynamic immortality of seeing your creations take on new forms of life. In that sense, living intensely and creatively isn't just a personal act, but a gift to the future. At the same time, he warned against the vanity of trying to control how our legacy will be used. Once we create something and put it into the world, it becomes raw material for other players to transform, sometimes in ways we never imagined, or even in ways we wouldn't approve of. The greatness lies in accepting that unpredictability as part of the game itself. If what we've created is alive, it will inevitably change. And so, we've reached the end of this journey through Nietzsche's ideas, exploring life as a great game, with no fixed rules, but full of creative possibilities. If each lesson we shared here planted even a small seed of reflection, then it was already worth taking this path together. I want to sincerely thank you for being here with me until the end. Philosophy isn't made only of concepts, it's built through encounters. And this dialogue exists because you're on the other side, thinking, questioning, and playing your own game with more awareness. Now, if this video inspired you, make sure to subscribe to the channel so we can keep this conversation going and you won't miss the next content. Hit the like button to help bring these ideas to more people. Share it with someone you think could also benefit from these reflections. And tell me in the comments, which of Nietzsche's ideas resonated with you the most? And of course, stay tuned, because there are more videos waiting for you here, ready to expand your philosophical perspective even further. After all, the game of life goes on, and we're still playing it together.